In the name of the one holy and living God, amen. It's probably one of the better known of the call stories in the Bible. Moses' encounter with God and a burning bush. In a masterful narrative, the story unfolds about Moses, no longer a prince of Egypt, meeting the living God while tending his father-in-law's flocks. Out of this burning bush, Moses is called to fulfill a mission to free his ancestral people. But to be perfectly honest, when people speak to me about their own discernment of God's call and are looking for ways in the Bible about how God speaks to us, I almost never send them to this reading. And I think the obvious reason has something to do with that burning bush. Most folks discern God speaking in far more subtle ways. Although I will be the first to admit that when I'm struggling to understand what God would have me do to act as a follower of Jesus, I'm often not so subtly begging God to speak to me as clearly as God speaks to Moses. And I'm even bargaining, saying, it doesn't have to be a burning bush. A little smoking twig or leaf will do. And then Peter comes along, as he does in today's gospel, to remind me of another reason why a call story, any call story, is challenging. Even when it's abundantly clear what God would have us do, we don't get to engage in such a call without challenge, without fear, without cost. A call creates a relationship to the one who calls us. To say yes to God, to say yes to Jesus, is to participate in a life in which divine love is constantly challenging our identity as children of God, exposing what is not loving in us and in the world in which we live. And here's the other thing we learn in the gospel today. We don't get to say, "Thank you for calling me as your disciple, and here is how it's going to play out." No, no, no. Seeing what God has in mind for us, seeing ourselves for who we really are, does tend in me to dampen that enthusiastic cry from another call story, this of the prophet Isaiah, take me to, let me think about it a moment. And that is so clear in the person of Moses. Moses is a mess when we meet him in today's reading. As one writer notes, Moses has paid dearly for his inability to deal with his bicultural life and all the stresses that entails. Rescued from Pharaoh's decree of death as an infant and raised in the Pharaoh's household as a free Egyptian, when he finally comes to understand that he is actually a member of that enslaved tribe of Hebrew people, his first act is to murder an Egyptian who is beating a Hebrew slave. When confronted with his actions by other Hebrews, Moses beats feet to his father-in-law's tent. And that's where we meet him today, no more than a hired hand tending the family flocks. And it's at this low point that he encounters God speaking to him, calling him. The divine call then often comes when what we hold dear or think is most important in our lives is just shredded, when our insight has become blindness. And that's when the living God is present and speaking to us. But let me tell you, God asks no small thing, offers no easy path to doing the right thing. God is clear that the work given to Moses is to return to the place where he is wanted for murder, to speak for a people who have already rejected him. And furthermore, he's to do so by going right to the top and to tell Pharaoh, no less, to let the Hebrew people go. While Peter has confidently identified Jesus for who Jesus really is at the very core of his being, the Messiah, today in the gospel, Jesus makes clear that this identity means that suffering and brokenness and death are part and parcel of fulfilling the call of God for him and all who follow him. Like Peter, we learn that a relationship with Jesus does not give us permission to write the script that we want to follow. Too often, that's a script of privilege, of being an insider, a gatekeeper to and for Jesus. It's a painful moment, because who among us wants such an adversarial relationship? To learn that following such a privileged path is to be Satan to Jesus. These lessons speak to one of our great struggles, dysfunctions, if you will, as both a community of faith and as individuals, trying to be a beloved community, trying to be beloved children of God. Too often we want to be blessed only as we are, and ignore the challenge of what it means to be the people God sees us to be at our best and most loving. We fear growing in our relationship with Jesus and each other, because that means not only growing as loving people. I mean, who doesn't want to be loving? It means giving up those identities, those relationships and stations in life that are anything but loving. To do this requires lament and challenge and rebuke and denial and all the ups and downs of confronting the Pharaoh in ourselves. I'm as guilty as the next person of slowly compromising away the radical message of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, tied up as it is in me, in a lifetime of privilege, and the known and unknown racism and classism I engage in on a daily basis. So I totally get Peter. I stand with him and say, hey, I'm following Jesus, and doesn't that mean that everything will be okay, and that what I do that I think is following you is good, right? To which Jesus responds by telling the truth to me. You need to risk your life as you know it, here and now. You need to release your privilege in whatever form it takes, so that rather than continuing to be entrenched in the ways of the world, you can embrace the Lord of life. And you can advocate for all those who are casualties of a world that always values things and systems above people, a world that grinds on because of our need to be gatekeepers and insiders, always above someone else at their expense. So tough as it is, Moses and Peter show us what it means to take the first bitty steps in confronting the truth of our identity. It is to take up the cross like Jesus, who refused to appease the status quo, even at the cost of his life. It means naming and fighting against all that is death-dealing in ourselves and in this world, like a privileged system of life that leaves anyone who is black or brown too often in want of food, education, health care, a decent place to live, an equal opportunity to thrive and to live, and for God's sake, to just be safe. If we follow Jesus by releasing our privilege and our desire always to call the shots, and instead give our lives to bear the burden of those who have never been the beneficiaries of any system, then we are saying something about what is of true value in this world. And what is of true value in this world is justice and mercy and peace for those who have mattered the least. I know that there is suffering in that way, and there is also a greater truth and joy that is contained in that old Shaker hymn, to turn will be our delight, till by turning God's world and we will come round right.